So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Catholic Impact Investing Collaborative's Community Forum on Laudato Si and Environmental Impact Investing. My name is Anne Shankin, and I serve as Director of the Catholic Impact Investing Collaborative, also known as CIIC. We are excited to have so many participants. Thank you each for joining. We want to start with a brief moment of silence. A few seconds for us to place what we carry in our hearts, burdens and joys and everything in the hands of God. Just a few seconds. So for our prayer today, we want to listen together to Pope Francis' words in Laudato Si.
A prayer for our earth. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace.
So, the Catholic Impact Investing Collaborative is the convener of a network of investors that want to respond to the prayer we just heard, of institutions that want to use their assets as a force for good, aligning their portfolios with Laudato Si and Catholic social teaching to accelerate the needed transformation towards a solidarity economy at the service of people and planet. In our CIIC Trusted Impact Investing community, learnings lead to action in allocating capital for a more just, equitable, and sustainable world. We offer a membership program for asset owners with access to a dedicated private community platform, a deal sharing dashboard and pitch sessions with peer-recommended and vetted investing opportunities. And we also offer a Catholic investing pledge to encourage organizations to move beyond avoiding harmful investments and proactively make commitments to measurable impact investments. After this very, very brief overview of CIIC, I would like to cover just a few housekeeping items. We encourage you to use the chat box to introduce yourselves, let us know where you're joining from, and to interact with each other and the speakers. If you have any questions or comments for the speakers, please make sure to drop them in the Q&A area, and we'll do our best to respond live or follow up after the webinar. Feel free to vote any questions by liking them, that you would like answered. And a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll send you a link of the recording in the next day or so. And now I'm excited to introduce our webinar facilitator, Rick Cicion, who serves as the co-chair of CIIC's Participation and Outreach Committee. Rick is principal and senior consultant at NEPC and has 17 years of institutional investment consulting and financial services experience. He's a senior member of NEPC's Endowment and Foundation Consulting Practice and serves on the Impact Investing Committee. In 2022, Rick relocated from Chicago to Colorado in order to spearhead NEPC's growth in the Mountain West. Please join me in welcoming Rick.
Thank you, Anne. Really excited to see everyone today. And as Anne mentioned, please feel free to throw any questions you have in the chat. But really focusing on the topic for today, this year marks the 7th anniversary of Laudato Si, Pope Francis's landmark encyclical on care for creation. Pope Francis opened up the conversation about caring for creation being a moral issue and established a helpful framework for understanding Catholic social teaching in the context of today's ecological crisis and climate emergency. This webinar is designed to showcase how Catholic organizations have incorporated Laudato Si into their impact investing work, and will share resources for those interested in starting their own impact investing journeys centered around the Pope's encyclical. We'll hear from Elizabeth Garlow with the Francesco Collaborative and Laudato Si movement, as well as 2 Catholic asset owners, John Paul Slosar from Ascension and Father Seamus O'Neill from St. Patrick's Missionary Society. To start, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Elizabeth Garlow, co-founder, of Francesco Collaborative. Elizabeth is focused on building a movement toward a solidarity economy animated by the vision of Catholic social teaching. With her investing and social innovation backgrounds, she guides faith-based investors and new economy builders toward an alternative vision for finances and other resources we steward. She's based in Detroit with her partner and 1-year-old daughter and is spending some time this summer apprenticing with urban farmers. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Rick. It's so good to be with you all. I'm going to share just a few slides to help guide the discussion today. So as Rick mentioned, I co-founded the Francesco Collaborative, and we are this sort of burgeoning network of entrepreneurs and investors and new economy protagonists that were born of the Economy of Francesco, which is a global movement that was launched by Pope Francis a few years ago with this call to build a moral economy. And I think in many ways it's very anchored in the vision of Laudato Si. So we've been thinking about and accompanying investors to reflect on how, as people of faith and stewards of financial and other meaningful resources, we're really invited to develop an economics that's appropriate to the needs of this time. And this time is really special and really pivotal. So one thing that we reflect on is how this belief that as investors, the way we manage our resources is not just about enabling mission, it also is mission. So the ways we bring our investment practices into alignment with the tenets of our faith, of Catholic social teaching and Laudato Si, plays a really critical role in shaping a more just economy. And we've been thinking a lot about Laudato Si recently because we've partnered with Faith Invest and the Laudato Si movement to build a Laudato Si Investor Hub, which I'll share with you a little bit toward the end of the time today. What I wanted to do is just use this kind of familiar see, judge, or discern and act framework to help us really reflect on the invitation that's posed by Laudato Si for how we invest our resources, and maybe share a few ideas for how we could operationalize some of those reflections in really practical ways as investors. So just beginning with this concept of C, the concept of an integral ecology that is espoused within Laudato Si, it's so beautifully described there, really invites us to see this kind of deep relationship and interconnection between the economic, the social, the environmental, and financial factors that really are contributing to the realities that are confronting us today. And so as we think about it, our dominant economic and financial system in many ways has produced tremendous fruits, lifted many people out of poverty, and done a lot of good around the world. It is also accelerating various aspects of environmental destruction and social decline. And that's because it's founded in an economic model that doesn't necessarily recognize the sort of planetary limits of our common home. And so we continue to sort of drive unsustainable extraction and inequality as part of this system. And in many ways upholds this culture of waste, or this disposable culture that we've heard Pope Francis reflect so much on. So by really starting with drawing our attention to the sort of wisdom that animates our finance and investment activities, we can start to see a little bit more clearly the role that we are playing in this system, whether we're either perpetuating or we're healing those structural dimensions of the global economy that are so vividly described in Laudato Si. So the first invitation here is for us as investors to see, to sort of wake up and to become aware of the ways our finance and investment activities are contributing to environmental and other social harms, how they're held, who holds them, the managers we're engaging with. And so there's a whole kind of auditing process of becoming aware with our portfolios. The second step here is what we would call judge or discern. From my perspective, one thing that's really exciting about Laudato Si is its very clear call to ecological conversion, which we could understand as kind of a conversion is, a turning of the mind and the heart to reflect on and align our decisions with a kind of society that upholds the dignity of creation and the common good. So within the Laudato Si framework, we can't isolate our finance and investing activities and their motives from our shared flourishing as a people. I've been working on 5 principles rooted in Laudato Si to help guide investors that I wanted to share with you today, and would love to just be in dialogue with you about these, see how they're landing with you, whether they're resonant and helpful. The first is that of listening to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, which is something you're all deeply familiar with from the text. I think that this concept, this invitation from Pope Francis, is an invitation to be in right relationship with our brothers and sisters, and of course, our common home. So how are our resources flowing in ways that leave communities and workers, the environment, and other stakeholders better off than they were before our investment activity? As investors, I think Laudato Si invites us to listen and to relate and to collaborate with grassroots movements and communities in ways that we might not necessarily be incentivized to do so or have done so in the past. And this process of deep listening should kind of have a profound influence on us. The second is this idea of encounter and accompaniment. So I think Laudato Si invites us to recognize the uneven power dynamics that can ensue when we steward capital. So as owners, as holders of wealth, there is a certain kind of power dynamic that comes into play. And Laudato Si invites us to think about how we redress those power imbalances by really engaging communities in the design, the governance, the ownership of our economic activities. And I think this has pretty interesting implications for how we might structure our investments in our portfolios, and particularly to think about how we're fairly balancing risk and return across a number of different stakeholders who are implicated in our finance and economic activities. The third is this beautiful and sometimes mysterious concept of integral ecology. I think really adopting an integral ecology worldview calls for a pretty profound reevaluation of our activities, both in our individual and personal lives, as well as our collective and institutional lives. So, for example, it might manifest in a standard of simplicity that invites us to define different kinds of financial return objectives for our portfolios, maybe seeking not just to kind of blindly maximize financial returns, but to exercise prudence when considering how our investment portfolios kind of impact the broader human and environmental ecology. It might also invite us to consider a different sort of time horizon. So often in the finance and investment world, we're sort of beholden to these short-term performance benchmarks, but Pope Francis in Laudato Si invites us to take what he calls a helicopter view, just seeing the big picture, having a longer horizon, and really this, reflecting on what it means to be good ancestors. Next is this idea of stewardship. As you dig into Laudato Si, you see that it sort of boldly invites us to shift our language and perspective from ownership to stewardship, and from kind of what Pope Francis has in there, from dominion to cooperation and co-creation with God. And here, I think there's just a lot of wisdom about building portfolios that are kind of more balanced across the areas of risk And that's risk understood holistically to include the risks of our ecological crisis. Return, which is also understood holistically across various metrics and return for multiple beneficiaries. And then other dimensions of Laudato Si, especially integral ecology and its call for accountability to the earth and the poor. Lastly is this idea of creativity and moral imagination. I love that Pope Francis emphasizes this in Laudato Si, because the urgency of the ecological crisis that we're dealing with calls for a moral imagination. It calls for us to take some bold actions, to bring new visions for the future into existence today. And I think in many ways, it calls us to make the path by walking it and endeavoring through our participation to kind of open us up to more and different types of opportunities for our investment. And this is really, this is a big deal, because so often the third-party managers and the advisors and others that we're working with are continuing to operate in a system that doesn't necessarily incentivize kind of moral imagination and creativity. And so I think it sort of behooves us as stewards of capital to really step into that kind of creative vision and moral imagination. Finally, this part of this third part of the framework here, ACT. I think this quote from Pope Francis here is really strong, that we're invited to become painfully aware of the suffering and to make it our own, the suffering of the earth and of the poor, and to discover what each of us can do about it. So Laudato Si is it's a bold document. It calls for action. And I think in many ways, taking up this call to ecological conversion entails deepening our encounters, particularly with those on the peripheries, and finding ways to invest our resources to redress the structural inequities that exist. I think in particular, Laudato Si makes very clear that a preferential option for the poor, one of the core tenets of Catholic social teaching, is inseparable from any solution to the ecological crisis. So while in many ways people might hear Laudato Si and think environmental investing, it's very deeply intertwined and interwoven with this preferential option for the poor. And Pope Francis points to that again and again, that this intimate relationship between the poor and the fragility of the planet. So as we deepen our Laudato Si journey, we can ask ourselves, to whom and to what am I accountable? And how might that accountability influence my approach to investing? This is an integral ecology movement alignment map that we've been working on as part of the Laudato Si Investor Hub that I mentioned earlier. I'll share with you where you can find this, but this is one of many kind of practical frameworks and resources we're seeking to develop to help people think about, the what of my investing. So as we're building this movement, this Laudato Si investing movement, we may find ourselves taking a number of different strategies to do that. We might take resist approaches like exclusionary screens and divestment strategies, to active engagement and dialogue, to these kind of build approaches, more proactive investments for positive social impact. And also the how of our investing really matters, what you see here on the vertical axis. It's really critical how we think about beginning maybe with our own individual values and actions, and then start to build relationships that bring us into accountability with community stakeholders. And this idea of being in right relationship with different stakeholders and how it can influence our approaches to divestment, to shareholder activism, and to positive social investing. So I just wanted to conclude here by saying, we have an invitation for you as part of the Laudato Si Investor Hub. I'll drop a link into the chat to that hub, and I hope that you can join this hub here. Hopefully you can see this. There's just tremendous resources and reflections. There are guiding meditations, frameworks, case studies, stories of people that we've collaborated with CIIC on, of people who are putting Laudato Si into practice. And really this coming October, we'll launch a cohort, a workshop cohort, so people can come together and discern collectively, October 1st through 21st, how can I do this practically? What does it mean to embrace and embody Laudato Si in my investing activities? So I'll drop a link there too in the chat to some upcoming Q&A and info sessions, and really look forward to the dialogue. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Really good words, and I think really we all learned from your comments and have now a common understanding, and hopefully we can use that as a launching point. I'd like to now introduce our second speaker, John Paul Slosar. John Paul is the Senior Vice President of Healthcare Ethics at Ascension. In his role, Dr. Slosar has primary responsibility for strategic and operational leadership of the Ethics Center of Expertise within the Mission Integration Ministry-wide function. In this capacity, he oversees the integration of clinical and organizational ethics through Ascension, the use of Ascension's organizational ethics discernment process, and ongoing development and maintenance of positive working relationships between leaders of the Roman Catholic Church and leaders of Ascension. Welcome, John Paul.
Thank you, Rick, for that introduction. As you can glean from that introduction, my subject matter expertise is in the area of ethics, not necessarily investment or finance. So when we get to the Q&A section, there may be some more operational questions that I'm unable to answer, but if that's the case, I will be happy to go back to our investment experts and find out. And it is one of my favorite parts of my job that I get to support Ascension Investment Management, which is our investment arm within Ascension. I want to build on some of the themes that Elizabeth shared with us. Insofar as at Ascension, we view Laudato Si as first and foremost an invitation to both conversation and conversion, which requires advocacy through both our words and our actions. What is most striking about this invitation from Pope Francis is that it is extended to everyone, to all of humanity, and not merely to the faithful. Pope Francis grounds this invitation in three powerful interrelated proclamations that we have since adopted as foundational principles for both Ascension's own transformative journey to help heal the environment through our own operations as a healthcare system, as well as AIMS or Ascension Investment Management's investment strategies concerning environmental justice. The first of Pope Francis's proclamations that we have adopted as a foundational principle is that environmental justice is not an option or merely secondary aspect of, but is essential to a Christian life of virtue. The second is that our current state of ecological crisis is largely, if not primarily, due to human interventions in the service of business interests, consumerism, and technocratic progress. The third of Pope Francis's proclamations within Laudato Si that we have adopted as a foundational principle is that environmental degradation impacts the integrity and totality of the integral web of all of God's creation. But as Elizabeth noted, among the human species, it has a disproportionate impact on those who are already poor and vulnerable due to pre-existing injustices and the subsequent social marginalization they experience. Thus, environmental justice is inextricably connected with the virtue of solidarity, and again, as Elizabeth mentioned, the preferential option for the poor, and thus is an essential element of mission integrity within all of Catholic healthcare. However, as Pope Francis instructs, the full solution must proceed from a shared understanding of an integral ecology grounded in a universal communion that must take the place of our current enculturated, and I'm not going to say this on the first try, anthropocentrism, oh, I got it, radical individualism, and the hubris of human dominion over the gifts of creation. Ascension's response to this invitation is twofold. First, as I already alluded, as a health system, we are focusing on our own use and care of the environment in our operations. Second, we are striving to evangelize the best way we know how, with money. Well, just kidding, kind of. More precisely, we are striving to be a positive social influence for the sake of the common good through the environmental investment strategies of Ascension Investment Management. Ascension's environmental stewardship program in our operations has three pillars. First, Ascension has set a goal of net zero carbon with absolute emission reductions by the year of 2040. Second, we will minimize the impact of our supply chain by recycling 50% of non-hazardous waste from all managed facilities by 2030, with a goal of zero waste by 2040. And third, we will work with those communities in which we serve that are most impacted by climate change to create healthier living conditions. If this is about investment, why am I focusing on our operations? I think this is part of our integral ecological view as a health system that requires not only influencing and acting through our investment strategies, but it is that call to conversion in ourselves that we must respond to as well, and therefore address this in a holistic manner, as Pope Francis invites and in fact actually requires within Laudato Si. Regarding the investment aspect of it, AIM has adopted a twofold environmental justice strategy. First, AIM has substantially reduced its exposure in fossil fuels through a divestment strategy that restricts investment in energy and utility companies that are not participating in the solutions to our environmental crisis through a predominant focus on developing and providing clean and renewable energy resources. Second, AIM's social impact funds have a strong focus on clean and renewable energy. Approximately 20% of our social impact investments are in clean and renewable sources and technologies, and another 20% are in areas that have a secondary environmental benefit. These latter impact investments are focused on technological solutions to enhance crop production, food safety, animal health and nutrition, green chemicals and natural pesticides, and resource conservation, especially that of fresh water, all of which are issues explicitly identified and addressed throughout Laudato Si. In these ways, AIM is playing a pivotal role in Ascension's efforts to respond to the invitation Pope Francis has offered to all of us through Laudato Si. And while I am sure there is more we could be doing, as there is always more that we all could be doing in the service of authentic human goods, it is important to remember that Pope Francis's teaching in Laudato Si, as in all of his teachings, is informed not just by faith, not even just by faith and reason, but by faith, reason, and human experience. Thus, Pope Francis's invitation must be understood in light of that old proverbial Aristotelian virtue known as the mean of practical wisdom. As Pope Francis himself writes, at one extreme, we find those who doggedly uphold the myth of progress and tell us that ecological problems will solve themselves simply with the application of new technology and without any need for ethical considerations or deep change. At the other extreme are those who view men and women and all their interventions as no more than a threat, jeopardizing the global ecosystem, and consequently the presence of human beings on the planet should be reduced and all forms of intervention prohibited. Viable future scenarios will have to be generated between these extremes, since there is no one path to solution. Thank you for your time and attention. I look forward to the conversation with my fellow panelists.
Thank you so much, John Paul. Really appreciate the words. Finally, last but not least, I'd like to introduce our final speaker, Father Seamus O'Neill. Father Seamus serves as St. Patrick's Missionary Society, the Missionary Society of Apostolic Life, founded in Ireland in 1932. He has worked in parish ministry in Kenya, student formation in Ireland and Kenya, congregational leadership, and currently in congregational finance. He has a particular interest in developing sources of alternative energy for his congregation and is working to align the congregation's investments with their mission by reemploying some of their funds to impact investing in Sub-Saharan Africa. Welcome, Father Seamus.
Thank you, Nick, and good evening, everyone. In fact, it's evening where I'm at. I think it's probably morning for most of you. I just want to give a short description of what we're doing and how Laudato Si has woken us up, and what we have tried to do in two areas. You can call both areas impact investing, but one I call internal and the other I call external. The internal is what we were able to do at home, where we're at. So a few years ago, we decided to invest in trying to get alternative sources of energy for our own property. Or here, where I'm living at the moment, we have a 60-bed retirement home, and we have been trying to get some alternative energy sources for that. I'll talk a little bit more about that in more detail in a minute. The external then would refer to trying to transition some of our congregational resources, which are in traditional investments at the moment, trying to transition them to impact investing, specifically in Sub-Saharan Africa, because that aligns more closely with our mission. Most of our missionaries are working in Sub-Saharan Africa. The internal transition that we've been able to do here in this area here, we have a farm. It was traditionally a dairy farm, but about 4 years ago, we were doing some readjusting, and also we were looking around for ways to respond to Laudato Si. So an opportunity arose then where we could reorganize our land, our farmland, and we set aside 35 acres in order to grow biomass for a new heating system for the retirement home. We planted a willow crop. We installed a new biomass boiler, and we piped the heating water to the 4 main buildings on the compound here. In this way, we have been able to replace about 45,000 liters of oil, heating oil, each year. That converts to about 133 metric tons of carbon that we have saved each year since then. You probably may be aware that willow crop is carbon neutral. While it's growing in the field, it takes in carbon. And then when you burn it, it releases that same carbon. So it's not creating any new carbon for the atmosphere. Also, the new technology that's been employed in boilers nowadays, they're cleaner. They have a cleaning system for the exhaust fumes, and they take out a lot of the particles out of the exhaust. So in all, it is much cleaner. 2 other main areas that we have invested in also are a wind turbine for generating electricity, and that has been working well. Of course, the wind doesn't blow all the time. It blows in from the Atlantic here a good bit of the time, but over a year, it would supply about 1/3 of our electricity that we use here. We have that supplemented then by, we installed some solar panels, some PV panels. You may know that there's not a lot of sunshine in Ireland either, but modern PV panels don't depend solely on the sun shining. They will work with ordinary daylight. And so they're also giving us electricity. So these are some practical ways that we have been trying to implement the, if you like, the theology, the spirituality of Laudato Si. The other area then would be what I call the external, and this would be our traditional investments or congregational resources. So we had been searching for ways to align our mission with our investments, or our investments with our mission, if you like. And so for us, that would be trying to invest in Sub-Saharan Africa. But we find it very difficult to get our traditional commercial fund managers interested in that, because very risk averse to investing in Africa, as you probably are aware. And we really made no headway on that until I was introduced to CIIC. And since joining CIIC, we have learned a lot. We have learned a lot just by hearing what others are doing and by sharing with others what we try to do. And so at last we have found a way of doing that. We've found a way of investing. We have discovered there are ways of investing in Sub-Saharan Africa, and there are very good ways of making impact investments. And we have already began that with one investment, and we have 3 or 4 other investments in the pipeline. One of the keys, I think, to making progress here was that our leadership, the leadership of the congregation, took on this project, and it was very easy to get them interested in it, especially since it was linked with Laudato Si. Also recently then, we had a chapter which had been postponed for 2 years because of COVID. We eventually got an opportunity to have the meeting this year. And at that meeting, I presented these ideas to the delegates at the chapter, and there was very good response to it. They could see the rationale behind impact investing and trying to align our investments with our mission. So we got very good agreement at that meeting. So I think the way is open for us to push ahead with impact investing, and we would be aiming to move at least 10% of our investments to impact investing in this way in the near future. So perhaps that's enough for now. But if there's anything, maybe it might come up in the questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Father Seamus. Now, as he noted, we'll transition to our discussion and question and answer portion. A reminder that if you do have any questions or comments for our speakers, please submit those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we do have a couple of questions, the first of which has been answered, but we do have a question that has come in, and it was in regards to the integral ecology slide that Elizabeth presented. She has posted a link to that in the chat. So for those of you who are interested, please refer to the chat box and you can find that one. The next question, and I'll pose this one to Elizabeth. As you're thinking about Laudato Si, and as the participants and attendees of this have listened, what is it most important for us as investors to really understand about Laudato Si? If you could boil it down, I know it's a big it's a big movement, but if there were one thing that you could really take away or want us to focus on today, what would that be, Elizabeth?
Yeah, so my recent reading and reflection on Laudato Si has really led me to hone in on this theme of encounter. So from my perspective, I think as an investor community, who we are encountering and who we are in relationship with should have deep impact on our investment activities. And I think what you heard from the example with Father Seamus is that could be a community in a distant part of the world, right, that we're in encounter with. It can also be people who we're adjacent to. I think what Pope Francis calls us to do is go to the peripheries. And you see that language again and again in Laudato Si. And so I think the part of what you see reflected in that movement alignment map that Molly mentioned, that integral ecology slide, is this kind of growing journey as we encounter one another. What are the ways that being in relationship might influence how we think about our investment priorities and how we structure our investment transactions to try and ensure benefit for the environment and for others who, in communities.
Wonderful. That's great. I really appreciate that. Father Seamus, as you think about implementing Laudato Si into your investments and making sure that your mission and investments are very much aligned, how did the decision to more explicitly integrate Laudato Si into your investment, or excuse me, how did the decision to explicitly integrate Laudato Si impact the investment policy statement or the governing body of your investment program?
Yeah, I think it's the theology and the spirituality that's contained in Laudato Si. It really links it to the gospel message, and I think for us as missionaries, like this is foundational. It's basic. So it's just for us. Then it just becomes a natural progression that we would look to different kinds of investments, and not the traditional stocks and shares that are really making somebody else rich. And our mission is to the poor. Our mission is to those who are left out. So if there's some way of using our resources to help, and that we would still preserve our capital, then that's a win-win situation for us. So that's how we linked it up. It just falls in naturally, if you like, into our thinking.
Wonderful. That's great. A follow-on question just came in, and this is directed towards you, Father Seamus. First of all, it started with a congratulations on the commitment to 10% of your investment portfolio. And then how have the investment managers reacted, and how have you engaged with your manager on this ambition? What was the response or reception to that?
Yeah, well, as I explained, we had been trying for some time, for a few years, to see would any of our managers be able to do this for us? Would they be able to find investments for us in Africa? And we really had no success with that at all. And we still find it very difficult. So we have to look outside of that, I think. Although through CIIC, I have learned that there are other managers, and we're pursuing some of that at the moment. There are other managers who now understand this kind of investment, and some of them are dedicated to it. So we'll be looking in those areas now. But I suppose what we discovered perhaps is that if you want to do impact investing, you have to be prepared to work without the traditional managers and find ways. And I think this is where CIIC is a great help, because in CIIC you have if you like, a community of people who are dedicated to this kind of investment. You also have a lot of expertise from the different congregations, and they're willing to share that, and they're willing to share it with others who have the interest. So I think I can't stress enough how enlightening it has been to be part of CIIC and to learn from the group.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, my wife this coming October is headed to Uganda for a 10-day mission trip with some folks from our church. So she's excited about getting a firsthand view of it.
Yeah.
I'm excited to hear from her. Hey, real quickly, I want to turn to John Paul, and this, I think, intersects the overlap between operations and investing. And one of the struggles that I think a lot of investors have is in terms of measuring impact. How have you gone about that? What are perhaps some struggles you've encountered? And have there been any solutions that you can provide the group that have really been beneficial in your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm particularly interested in the measurement question. It is really difficult, and there is no one size fits all solution to that, right? So the way in our impact funds that we go about measuring impact is, obviously we develop a thesis of what we want the investments to achieve, first of all. And then we really have to work with the managers to say, relative to each specific investment, what is the metric that we're going to use to measure success? And is that, so many gallons of water per acre saved in an agricultural investment, or is that so many watts of solar power, wind power generated through an investment? And many of those investments actually are, like Father Seamus was saying, in Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as in places like the US. But it really is, it's a, I would say from our side, it's a labor intensive, investment specific, thesis grounded development of metrics. And it's through working with those managers and having a values aligned relationship where we can say, this is a reasonable social impact that we would look to accompany our expected rate of return, which of course, in a social impact, still going to be positive, but maybe not quite as high as in more traditional investments, but we get that other social return on investment as well.
That's great. Thank you. Because I know that is an issue that many struggle with, and there is no one size fits all solution, certainly to this point. I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth for our next question. And as you look at Laudato Si, and you look not only today, but down the road, perhaps over the next 5 to 10 years, what is your hope for how it will be embraced, implemented, and really applied across the investor landscape?
Great question. I think the last piece of creativity and moral imagination that I brought up, to me feels like the spirit and the kind of circulation of energy that we need in this movement and in this space right now. To me, the question for each person on this webinar is, what is my most important work to embody Laudato Si? And I think each person's individual context and institutional and organizational context will be a little bit unique, a little bit different. And one thing about Father Seamus's story that's so powerful from my perspective is he spoke to a wide array of tools and resources at their disposal, from kind of direct investment capabilities to the land and the buildings that they steward, and how all of this is kind of at our disposal. And so I think the creativity that we can bring to bringing those things into alignment with Laudato Si is really powerful. One thing I dropped in the chat earlier is a link to some stories of groups who are really practically taking bold action steps. So these are CIIC members and others who are thinking about how they embody Laudato Si in their activities. So in 5 years, my hope is that what Father Seamus described about doing the digging and doing the hard work to ask, where's the investment product that feels deeply mission aligned? Like, you have to dig to find it, maybe it's not immediately at your fingertips with the managers you're working with, but that doesn't mean you don't stop, right? And so I think his courage to keep kind of asking and digging, and was it 1 acre fund, Father Seamus, that you invested in? 1 acre fund. So I think there's just this growing array of solidarity economy enterprises and funds and other products that are available, but they require our engagement as investors, as an investor community, to really start to take root and blossom and flourish. And so I think we as Laudato Si investors can come alongside them as catalysts. So that'd be my hope in 5 years, is that there are just a number of us who are serving as Laudato Si catalysts that way.
That's wonderful. And that answers a question kind of that just came in terms of, yes, we can do, like you said, each person's view of things may be a little bit different, but how can we encourage others in our diocesan investment committees and bishops to really openly share how they're going about this, and ensuring that everybody is on board and we're moving collectively this effort forward. So that was wonderful. Really, really appreciate that. I'm just going to wrap with one final question, and I'll open this up for anyone. But in terms of the the best practices outside of your own organizations. Are there certain things that you would want to highlight that perhaps other groups, and Father Seamus, you've noted the benefit of having access to peers within the CIIC network. Are there any examples that you would highlight as being really exemplary that you may want to share or take note of, or encourage others to perhaps follow?
You know, I don't have a particular example for that. Although, you know, there's a, not to advertise for competing organization, but hopefully we don't compete, right? There's the Interfaith Council for Corporate Responsibility that does a lot of great shareholder advocacy work in you know, not only the environmental area, but the human rights and corporate responsibilities area. And I think they really do a great job of giving voice to a more just economic structure and market, right? But to me, the really important part is something that Elizabeth, or the opportunity, something that Elizabeth started with, which is, this is not just about the environment. Laudato Si is not just about the environment, right? It is about an integral ecology that looks at social influences just as much as environmental influences. So I think any organization that we're functioning with that cares about the social wellness of our human communities is an appropriate opportunity to advocate for the ideas that we've all discussed as embodied within Laudato Si. So, and I apologize, I have to jump a few minutes early to another webinar, but thank you all very much for the opportunity to converse with you today, and blessings in your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John Paul. Really appreciate it. And now what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn it back to Anne and have her wrap here, but really appreciate the perspectives of both Father Seamus and Elizabeth in guiding this discussion forward. If there are questions that we haven't been able to answer, certainly feel free to reach out to us. We would be happy to continue the dialogue and engagement, and look forward to hearing from you again. So Anne, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rick, for facilitating today. And a special thank you to Rick and Jessica Cook, co-chairs of CIIC's Participation and Outreach Committee, who helped plan this webinar, along with Maggie Sola, who's you are not seeing, but she's the one in the background who makes it all happen. We are very grateful to each of our speakers, Elizabeth, John Paul, and Father Seamus, for sharing their thoughts, experiences, and truly valuable insights about Laudato Si and a little bit of their impact investing journeys. We want to find out more. There's so much more. There's another question that just came here, Father Seamus from Melody, wanting to know more. We'll have to create other opportunities to keep sharing. There are many congregations that are following us today, many sisters and others. If you're an impact investor already aligning assets with your unique mission, or your organization is interested in starting a journey of Laudato Si guided investments, please get in touch with us. We'd love to share more details about the membership program or the Catholic Investing Pledge. But mostly we want to extend this invitation to join our community. The CIIC community of Catholic investors is a trusted space for peers to connect, share, learn from each other, and support one another while accelerating impact. So we hope to hear from you. One last thing before we wrap up. If you have 2 minutes now and would like to share your feedback about this and future CIIC events, please click on the form that will pop up at the conclusion of the webinar. We appreciate your thoughts on the webinar, but also welcome your ideas for future forums. So for now, thank you again to each one, and have a great day, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Anne.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.